All right. We're going to be talking about launching and scaling your side project. But before we get started, just a quick introduction.
So my name is Michele Hansen. I lead product development at The Motley Fool. I'm also in Virginia Tech's MBA program. And I also have a cold, so if I start coughing, I'm sorry.
And I'm Mathias Hansen. I work for a company called Videoblocks. It's a startup that provides a subscription-based access to stock media. So video, photo, audio, and stuff like that. And we try to make it super affordable for the masses.
And together, we've launched a bunch of side projects. But the one we're going to talk about most today is Geocodio. And so it's a geocoding SaaS. We turn addresses into latitude and longitude so you can make maps online or store data about your customers. And we launched in January of 2014, and we have thousands of happy customers.
So in this presentation today, we're going to talk as much about the product and business side of things as we're going to talk about the technical aspect of kind of how we went by doing things. We're going to give some practical examples from our successes and our failures, because there's plenty of those. And hopefully today you'll leave with some tools and some motivation to get started or get scaling yourself. So another thing I want to mention is we're going to take it as a point of view from our experiences and what we did. A lot of these things will apply in a lot of other projects, but just know it's not a boilerplate of this is how you have to do it. It's just kind of our point of view. We're also going to take a focus of building a SaaS app, not like a mobile app or anything like that. It's a SaaS business. It's a thing we built. And we kind of take a US-based point of view. Again, a lot of these things will apply if you're creating a business in Europe or whatever.
So the first thing we're going to talk about is you are an entrepreneur. And maybe you don't know it yet, but I think a lot of you probably already do. Like, so many people I've talked to here are entrepreneurs. And so even if you don't think you are, you probably are. And maybe that's technical, maybe it isn't. But there has never been a better time to start a business, especially if you have technical skills. All you need is like a cheap virtual server, a domain, incorporated, and you're ready to go. Just like thinking back, like 300 years ago, for example, when Samuel Johnson was writing the first English dictionary, he had to go out and raise the equivalent of venture capital to write a book. But now you can just launch a business with a $10 server. It's amazing. And we want each one of you to be able to seize that opportunity and recognize that you have the ability to go out and create a business.
So we tried to establish like a high-level framework of how to approach this, and we boiled it down to 3 pieces. First, you want to build something you need. You want to make sure you build it as simple as you possibly can, and then use all the advantages that you might have. And that's kind of what we're going to go through.
Yeah, so the first thing we're going to talk about is building something you need. So everybody out there, like, how many of you have ever been frustrated? Right? Like, we've all been frustrated by things. And the key to finding a good business is finding something that frustrates you. And like, maybe that's technical, but maybe it isn't. So our side project, we were frustrated by some stuff going on in the geocoding market. But it might not even be technical. For example, TJ Miller, who's in the audience, I was talking to the other day. Where are you? He and his wife were frustrated by how much they had to spend in order to get good coffee. And so they're starting their own roastery. Like, how amazing is that? Once you see the world as a place that you have influence over and you can take these things that frustrate you and turn them into opportunities, it's a really exciting place.
Hold on. Here you go.
All right.
All right. So just a couple of weeks ago, Jesse Watson, who's an Amazon engineering manager, wrote a blog post. And there's a quote from there that really resonated with us. And what he said was, "The hard part isn't the technology. The #1 failure of the software industry is building the wrong product."
And so what you want to solve a problem for yourself is you want to avoid solving the wrong problem, right? So if you're solving a problem for yourself, it means you have direct access to the customer. You know what the customer is frustrated by. You have deep empathy for them. And so you're going to spend your time building what the customer needs rather than what you think is going to sell. You also understand the competition. If this is something that's frustrated you, you've probably looked into all of the options out there and found that they weren't going to work. And so you have a really great understanding of the competitive landscape. You also understand the jobs that the user is going to hire the product for. We'll get into this a little bit later, but somebody buys a product to do a job for them. And you're also aware of the different things that a user is trying to do in pursuit of whatever this goal they have is of why they are hiring this product in the first place. And so here's a little framework we use to find opportunities. No. So this is a little framework. So looking at things, so think about it like you have your core product. Like that is the core solution that you're selling. Like for example, if this is Starbucks, like it's the coffee itself. Like that's the core product. And then you have packaging, which is the way you have packaged the product so that it's something that the user can interact with. So if this is coffee, that's a cup, right? But there's also people who make coffee gum and ice cream and all sorts of other things. Then you have pricing, which is both your pricing and your pricing model. And also the value proposition, which is how you're kind of wrapping up your core product and the packaging and the pricing into something that is compelling to the user and solving a problem for them, right?
So I kind of want to go back to talking a little bit about Geocodio and how we came up with the idea of Geocodio. So basically, we found ourselves in an unserved market. And the reason why is before we had Geocodio, we built this app that no longer exists. But back then, we used to find grocery stores and convenience stores that opened near you. And what happened was we need to get the latitude and longitude for every single store, the coordinates, so we put them on a map so we can figure out what's close by. So we used an existing geocoding service to geocode all these stores. Well, what happened was we started adding more and more stores, and the geocoding API we were using had a limit of 2,500 lookups per day. When we hit that limit, we didn't really have an option to start paying a little bit. It was like free or enterprise solution. We couldn't really find anything in between. So long story short, we decided to, what does it take to build our own geocoder? Like, how can you build something yourself that works for us? And I kind of cobbled something together piece by piece, got something working. It worked for our app. And then suddenly we were like, well, if we had this problem, maybe someone else would have or could have the same problem right now. Let's just try putting it out there. It's really crappy. Like, it's not very good, but it worked for us. Maybe someone else can use it as well.
And so thinking back to this matrix, right, like we realized there was an opportunity in how we were packaging the solution, making it easier for people to interact with the data. Like our core product was the same, which is latitude and longitude of addresses. And then the pricing also, right? So like you could either get $2,500 for free a day, or you could spend like $10,000 or $20,000 a year to get, I think it was like $100,000 a day. And so we were just like right in the middle of this market, and there was nobody serving it. And we figured that if you just made it so people could just pay as you go after $2,500, like that was a huge unserved market. Like for other developers like us who just had these apps and we wanted to make them happen, and there was this pricing problem getting in our way.
Okay, so now you have an idea. You found the problem you want to solve. Well, what does a journey look like from idea to launching and scaling and so forth? How do you keep it going? How do you keep working on this? Well, the secret is to be really, really passionate and excited about what you're trying to build. It's really important that you deeply care about this and you can't sleep at night because you're so excited about building this product.
And this passion that's really the key to keeping it going. It's not quitting Netflix, right? Like, if you're super motivated by something, quitting Netflix is going to help you find more time, but it's not causative with motivation. It is not going to result in you being more motivated. Being passionate about what you're solving is going to cause you to sort of, cut things out of your life that are less important to you.
So the other thing is, when you decide to launch a side project, it's probably going to consume a lot of your time. If you lie sleepless at night, it's going to take a lot of hours in the day, right? So before you get too far in, first, make sure to talk to your friends, family, even maybe some coworkers. Try to validate the idea. Try to see if anybody else could potentially have the same problem. See what they think. Kind of get some validation. And if you have a spouse, like I do, make sure that you get their buy-in and maybe even their help. In our case, it kind of worked out like that. Because if you're going to spend a lot of time on this, you need to make sure that you have a good environment to spend time on this in. And then
Yeah, and you're also going to need some like really basic legal and financial stuff set up. And I know this stuff can be pretty intimidating, but it's really important. So for example, if you're in the US or another country where people really like to sue each other, you're probably going to want to incorporate, right? So if you're an LLC, which is a limited liability company, it means that if somebody sues you, the maximum they can sue you for is the assets of your business. And if it's a side project, especially for a while, you're probably not going to have a lot of assets, so that's okay. But you don't want someone to get upset about what you've created and then come after your personal assets, right? And in most states, this is pretty cheap. It's like $100, maybe $150. There's a bunch of services that can help you do this, but they're usually like $500 or around that, like LegalZoom and Stripe Atlas. But it's really not that hard. You also need a federal tax ID. This basically allows you to take money from people and file taxes.
Sorry, I did that.
Oh, it's okay. And that's free. You can just go to the IRS's website and get a tax ID, and it takes like 15 minutes. You need a bank account. So one thing that we didn't realize, so banks these days are kind of awful, and they charge you fees for everything, right? Like, who's encountered that? And they especially charge you fees on business bank accounts. So I remember when we started, like we just like went down to like the bank that we use for personally, and it was like $17 a month if our balance was under $3,000 a month for our business bank account. That's absurd. So NerdWallet, this is a great financial website. They pulled together a list of all of these banks that offer free business checking accounts that don't have any fees on them. And if you want to accept payments from people, like have a Stripe account and whatnot, you're probably going to need a bank account. But just make sure you have one that doesn't have any maintenance fees. And just that kind of stuff. And it's like it's really not too expensive, right? So like where we live in Virginia, it's $100 to open an LLC, and then I think like $50 a year to keep it registered. And so it's a little bit of money, a little bit of investment, but it's so worth it just in case like something goes wrong. But then the rest of the stuff really should be free.
And also just, I believe you can't really accept payments with Stripe without having a tax ID and stuff like that. So
yeah.
Some companies straight up require it to be able to work with you. So. And
this does differ, if you're not in the US, like for example, when you started your first side business in Denmark, needed like a VAT ID instead of a tax ID, and you didn't have to incorporate because like Danes are nice and don't sue each other as much. And so just like, thinking more about building something for yourself, right? Like we all want to build something that like all these other people use and it's awesome and we're making money for it, right? Like that's awesome. But if you build something for yourself, the worst case scenario, if you get it out the door, is that you have built something that makes yourself more efficient and you are no longer frustrated. And that is success.
And we've done that plenty of times. Build something, it never received any traction, it never really got anywhere, but we learned a lot from it. And we've solved the problem for ourselves, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And kind of pivoting into that, it really is a big learning experience to launch a side project, especially when you run it as a business. So for example, for our case with Geocodio, I really want to look into static site generation and like play with that. And I figured, I can build our Geocodio like landing page website using a static site generator. So I actually got to use Bo Simonson's, what's it called, Sculpin? Yeah, Sculpin to build the website. And I got to learn how that works. It's kind of cool. All kinds of other technologies I got to explore just based on that. Other things that isn't necessarily technology is all these skills that you also need to possess after a while. Stuff like how do you market it? How do you work with sales? How do you do customer service, customer support? That's actually not easy. It can be very frustrating, very boring sometimes, very repetitive. But it's really, really helpful to know more about how that side of the world works. So the second part is build it simply.
And so you want to build the MVP, your minimum viable product. What is the absolute basic thing you need to get out there in order to solve this problem for yourself?
So how do you build a minimum viable product? Well, first of all, you of course make sure, okay, what is the minimal feature set you can come up with? But it's also important to take shortcuts, kind of like when you go to a hackathon or something like that. Just use all the shortcuts you can. It's OK. You can always improve later. So for example, using a lot of off-the-shelf libraries, like all the amazing libraries by Spachi, for example, or Laravel Cashier and things like that. Of course, framework like Laravel itself is really helpful as a stepping stone as well. Use get a free Twitter Bootstrap theme. Like don't spend money on it. Don't worry about how pretty it is. If it gets the job done, it's fine. You can always update it later. And then the thing that catches us pretty often is spending hours on a name or a logo, going back and forth on that. Maybe spending more time or just as much time with the logo as you spend on creating the product. You can always change it later. It's not going to be make it or break it. It's probably not going to be that pretty anyways. Another thing I want to mention is we recently launched a new side project, kind of testing some waters. It's an app called Pixelblock that basically takes screenshots of websites and diffs them and lets you know if the website changes visually. And for the first time, I got to play with Laravel Spark. And I was not asked to talk about this. I just want to mention it. So basically, Laravel Spark made it possible for us from the get-go to handle billing, users, sign up, a login, all these boilerplate things that every single SaaS app needs. We didn't have Spark back when we launched Geocodio, but I really wish we did. So yeah.
And it doesn't have to be pretty, right? Like, how many of you have ever used this extremely ugly website, right? Like, it's still built in Perl, but they're making $700 million a year. Like, it's insane. And why they can do that is because functionally, it gets the job done, right? Like, it doesn't have to be pretty. If your solution works and it's solving that problem for people, they don't care how good it looks. But they're still going to be made.
Another thing, OK, now you get your product out there, you're starting to make it public. People on the internet are mean. I'm not sure if you noticed. They really are. Don't listen to them, at least not all of them.
Yeah, so there's this little company, there was a Y Combinator company, and they launched in 2007. Has anyone heard of them? Right? So when they launched on Hacker News, as you can imagine, people were just falling over themselves about how amazing this was and how much potential it had, right?
So that's a really quote from one of the top-rated comments on Hacker News about how terrible Dropbox is. For a Linux user, you can already build such a system yourself quite trivially by getting an FTP account, mounting it locally with curl FTP-FS, then using SVN or CVS, yay, on the mounted file system. From Windows or Mac, this FTP account could be accessed through built-in software. Easy, right?
Anybody can do it, right? And so when we launched, we were lucky enough to be front page of Hacker News, which was really helpful, not required. We'll talk about it later. We got a lot of really nice comments from people, but not everyone was that nice. And this person is like, well, let me know when you can do 1 million international geocodes per day for less than $10,000 a year. I was like, that's not really.
That's not what we do.
Yeah.
So go back to Geocodio again as an example. OK, so how did we come up with our MVP? And I kind of touched it in the beginning, but literally we built this, coupled together this kind of crappy geocoder, and put an API in front of it so developers could access and geocode addresses. And then we just slapped a paywall in front of that, essentially. And we kind of said, done. Let's try to launch this and see what happens.
Yeah, so we had the bare minimum features, right? So we had an API, we had 2 endpoints. We had just super simple, I think it was a straight bootstrap, it wasn't even a theme, it was just plain bootstrap.
Yeah.
Background for the dashboard, and you could just make an API key.
It still is.
Add your credit card and some very simple usage stats on how you're using it. And then when we launched it, we just kind of threw it up on Hacker News, hope for the best. And then the only thing we're using to monitor everything was Google Analytics. And so I mentioned that we're front page of Hacker News. And I mentioned this because it seems like it would be a really big deal and really important for the success of your product. But all it led to basically was a ton of traffic on the first day. And then it just fell off a cliff, right? It's not that important to have a big launch. If you build something really useful and you just keep at it, that's almost more impactful. Because our traffic then kind of went back up as people started using it and seeing the value of it. And so this is what it looks like when we launched, and we look at this and we're like, oh God, that's so ugly. Like, why is it neon blue? And like, but this was, like a free theme, and we didn't want to spend a lot of time on that because the important thing was building the API and making it so that people could solve their geocoding problem like we did.
So we just want to dive a little bit into the more technical aspects of how we got off the ground and things like that. So the first thing I want to touch on really briefly is just the architecture of the app. So this is how we started out. We had one web app that was the API itself. It was built on the Slim framework, which is a micro framework, a PHP micro framework. Later, we actually converted to Laravel Human because then we had the whole Laravel ecosystem. The dashboard was just a Laravel app, and then as I talked about, the statically generated site was a landing page. Like if you go to the Geocodio website, this is the static HTML site you see. So this is how we launched. And actually, in retrospect, this was probably more complicated than it had to be. If I was starting today writing code for this, I would probably just have made it like almost one giant monolith, maybe keeping the API side, merging dashboard and landing page. But there's no reason to split it up like crazy. Start with a monolith, and you can always split it out later. That's at least the experience. And the other thing is the infrastructure, like how did the servers work? So we really started with the bare necessities. Like we bootstrapped this, we had no money. Like we were trying to spend as little money as possible. So what we did was we just had one DigitalOcean $10 a month instance with our web server, database, everything on it. And this was what we had during, the Hacker News launch. We survived to tell the tale. Like, I don't really think anything went down. Maybe the server started being a little bit slow, but a lot of people just saw the landing page and didn't really sign up necessarily, or didn't really start using the API high volume from the get-go. So you're fine.
And so just thinking about that point, worrying about whether your architecture is going to scale is kind of like buying a lottery ticket and then worrying about what kind of boat you're going to buy, right? You don't really need to worry about that yet. Deal with success when it happens.
All right, so I want to dive a little bit deeper into the infrastructure and just kind of show how we went from one server to a lot of servers. Just showing, hey, that's one way to do it. So again, we started with the single server that did everything, and then and then after a little while, okay, this single server can't really handle everything. Let's try to get to a more a setup that can handle more traffic. So what we did, we put a load balancer in, just a simple load balancer with two web servers under it. One thing to note, we actually had the main MySQL database on the load balancer server because we didn't need a separate server yet. We literally multi-purpose. Used the server for multiple purposes, and it was fine. Now, then we introduced something called Geocodio Unlimited, which is essentially our multi-tenancy. If you watched some Slick's talk yesterday, that's kind of what we did with multi-tenancy. We'll get a little bit into that later. But basically, you get a private server. You can make as many requests to the server as you want. The way we started out doing that, we just set up a new server, just like the existing web servers, and then we gave you a specific URL. So instead of using api.geocodio, you got your own little api20.geocodio. Simple, got the job done, they got their own server, everything worked. Then as we grew, we started thinking more about redundancy. Okay, we don't want to have downtime. How can we avoid that? We got a little bit of revenue in, so we had a little bit more cushion to spend on the infrastructure, kind of trying to get that be as stable as possible. So we kind of did two things. Or three things, actually. We got a redundant load balancer because we had a problem once where our load balancer went down. The only server that went down, all there was servers worked totally fine. But because our load balancer was down, we couldn't route any traffic to anything, and our entire site was effectively down. So we got an extra one for redundancy. We also separated the database server out to a separate box, so we can easily scale that independently. And last but not least, we hid the Geocodio Unlimited instances behind the load balancer. And this is basically what our infrastructure looks like nowadays. We added redundancy to the main database as well. So we have a master and a slave, kind of like the poor man's Amazon RDS setup. And then we basically have a little cloud of ton of servers under the load balancers that talk to the main databases. That's kind of how we went from 1 to 30, 35 servers, different roles. Another thing I want to mention, we were talking about how we want to keep it super cheap from the get-go. How can we spend the least amount of money? This is what it costs to launch Geocodio, aside from like business and LLC expenses. Domain name is super expensive, $49 for that .io domain name. We had to buy a SSL certificate because back then Let's Encrypt did not exist. And we had a dashboard where you can enter your credit card. We want to make sure there's a little padlock in the corner so nobody gets like scared of entering their credit card information. And then, of course, our $10 a month DigitalOcean instance. So $74 is what we spent to launch Geocodio apart from the LLC.
And looking at this, and then the chart we put up earlier about the legal and financial costs of launching, the primary cost of launching your side project is really your time more than anything else. And so just on building your infrastructure and not building for scale right away, like you can only charge as much as the market can absorb, right? Like so you have to build as economically as you can until you figure out how big this market is, how many other people out there have the same problem you do, and what they're willing to pay for it. Right? Don't spend all your money.
So pricing is really, really hard. I didn't really think that when we started. We're like, oh, we're just going to look at like competitors and figure out kind of what the market's at and do something. Well, it turns out this is one of the things we spend the most amount of time on talking about on a daily basis. We've been talking about redoing a pricing structure for like a year, still haven't done anything because it's such a big deal and it's really difficult to get it right. We want to make it simple, but simple is not always the best option for pricing. It's difficult.
Yeah, so like thinking about your pricing. So first thing you want to look at is the competition. Like if there is competition, what are other people not only pricing at, but what is their structure? Is it monthly? Is it one time? Is it as you go? Like what are other people doing? And you want to think about like what can your customers pay? So for example, when we were launching Geocodio, we were like, okay, this is probably for developers side project or like freelance developers, like not people who have a super high willingness to pay a lot for a solution. And so we need to make sure that our infrastructure and our pricing reflect that to make this something that is accessible to people. You also want to think about how they want to pay. Do they want to pay by credit card? Do they want to pay by ACH? Do they want to pay by carrier pigeon? Like you want to think that through, like what is the most convenient for them? And you also have to think about your costs and what the servers are costing you and whatnot. And so your price, thinking back to that matrix we had earlier, like price is just as much of a signal to your users about the value of your product as your features are. And a low price is not necessarily the best. So for example, when Warby Parker was launching, given all of their cost of production, they thought that they should price at $49. But they went out and did some testing and talked to people and realized that was way too low because people didn't think the glasses could possibly be high quality at $49. So they kind of went back to the drawing board and they saw that $100 is this really important psychological level for a price. But pricing something at $99 kind of feels like it's on sale, like feels a little bit cheap. And so they settled on $95 because it was right below that important $100 mark, but it was specific enough to feel that was truly the cost of the product and the value you were getting. And so just thinking about scaling your pricing. So it turns out that companies are largely like much more reliable customers than people who are doing a one-off project, right? But it also means that they have different expectations of pricing. So whereas someone who just has their own side project that they're running, like you only want to pay just as much as you're using. A company, on the other hand, they budget sometimes years in advance. They want to know exactly what they're paying for something, and so they really like having a monthly plan or a yearly plan and being able to pay by ACH or by a paper check. And so just as you're scaling and people are coming to you with different use cases than you previously realized, that will also have implications for your pricing level and your pricing structure.
So I was briefly talking about Geocodio Unlimited earlier. So basically, we have the pay-as-you-go option. That's kind of how we launched. And later on, we had this unlimited option for the high-volume users who also really wished they had like a flat fee or something for like payment purposes or whatever. And one of the questions we gotten in the past was, so when you have this Geocodio Unlimited plan, like you're sold, right? You're good to go because you just got a handful or two of customers and you get like a really nice monthly revenue. Well, that's true and false at the same time because it's both a good and a bad thing. The problem with having these high amount plans is they're also really risky. The way we do it is on a month-to-month basis. We don't do contracts and 12 months, minimums and all this stuff. So if we have one or two Geocodio Unlimited customers cancel within a given month, suddenly that's going to make a big impact on our revenue. So we're trying really hard to make sure that we're not consumed by looking at the Geocodio Unlimited customers, but also really focusing on the pay-as-you-go customers because we're going to have way less risk because they're spread over a lot of customers. Some people might be paying $5 a month on Geocodio on the pay-as-you-go plan. Great. If you get 10, 15, 20 of them, perfect. So it's just kind of like a balance.
Yeah, we want to balance that, and I think right now about 40% of our customers are pay-as-you-go, which we think is really strong because that's serving the core market that we initially launched for.
Yep.
And also, it allows people who are on a team within a company to start using it without having to pay for it first, right? Like we all know when you go to your boss, to get approval for something, that can be kind of tough, and it allows you a way to get into those companies who are more reliable. And speaking a little bit more about the business side of this, so when you're scaling and you're making money, you want to start thinking about taxes. Like we all love taxes, right? But you just want to think about this because if you owe more, if you end up paying more than $1,000 for taxes in any given year, you'll need to pay quarterly estimated taxes. And the way I think about this is I just, in my head, all of our revenue, I just sort of carve off 40% of it for taxes and then don't touch it until we've actually figured out how much we truly owe. You also want to think more about legal stuff. So I mentioned earlier, if you're in the US, you want to be an LLC, so the maximum people can sue you for is the business's assets. And once the business has some assets, you want to start protecting those. And so you want to get liability insurance. You can get this through pretty much any insurance provider. Probably your car insurance provider would give you a good rate on business insurance as well. Most of them offer it. We work with Founder Shield, which is specifically made for startups and bootstrap businesses because they also have cyber business insurance and stuff like that. And it's a really great little thing. And I think it cost us $3,000, and that was so worth the peace of mind. It's also required for some of the bigger customers that we've been signing on. They want to see that you have insurance. And you also want to have a will, which I know we all love talking about when we're going to die, right? But if something happens to you and you have all these customers that are relying on you, you need to have a contingency plan for what happens. Is someone supposed to liquidate the business? Do you have a friend who could take it over? You just want to think that stuff through. And the last thing is you can also start drawing money for it. So in the beginning, I don't think we drew money from Geocodio for the first year and a half or so. And then I think we went to Iceland or something. That was the first thing we did with the money. But yeah, we didn't touch it for a really long time until we knew it was reliable, until we knew there was a safe cushion there. Treat yourself. Cool, all right, so scaling features.
So after you launch your project and you got a lot of good feedback and things are going, okay, you're going to get a lot of feature requests from customers. I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this. How do you kind of tackle that?
There's this quote I love, and I think I totally butchered it on the Laravel News podcast for those of you who are listening. It was you should only consider features if they're willing to stand on the porch for 3 days waiting to be let in. And this is from 37 Signals, now Basecamp, from their awesome book, Getting Real. I always picture this sad little feature, standing on the porch in the rain, waiting to be let in. But you really don't want to add something until you really know that there's a customer need for this. And so when you're thinking about your product, you only want to add those features after they've stood on the porch, right? In the beginning, you don't really need a lot of tools. You just basically need an email account that people can email and ask you for questions about how to use it. But as you start scaling up, you might need a customer support tool. So we started out using, I think, HelpFlow, which was a great tool, and then we went to Front, and then now we've been using Intercom, which is amazing. Yeah. You want to be looking at user experience. So in addition to Google Analytics, you want to make sure do you have any the sort of key conversion flows? Are people getting through them? Hotjar is this awesome tool that you can use to like watch people go through your site. It's kind of creepy at times, but it's really cool to be able to watch, someone going through something and see like where they're struggling or where they're going that you didn't expect. You want to think about SEO. This is a really important thing, especially if you're not putting money behind it in ads, which I don't think you should. In the beginning, I don't think we ran any ads until like 2 years in, and it's still like $50 a month or something in Google search ads. Once we really understood what people were looking for us for uniquely. And you want to listen to customers for their jobs. And so this is something I've kind of touched on a little bit so far. I don't want to go into it. So jobs to be done is this framework we use in product to do both product discovery and also understanding how to frame a product. And basically, it's the idea that a person hires a product to get a job done. So they have a goal, they have activities they're trying to do in pursuit of that goal, and they're hiring a product to help them with that goal. And so this is independent of any demographic characteristics or any other qualities that they have. And so you can have a functional job, an emotional job, a whole bunch of other ones. But the important thing here is when customers are giving you feedback and they're saying, hey, can you add this, can you add that? You want to dig a little deeper and figure out what is this really doing for them? What are they trying to accomplish? Because if you pull it back a few steps, you might realize that there's an even bigger opportunity if you build it in a different way or build something else, and then you end up building the right thing. And just going back to this, customers are never going to be able to fully articulate to you what they want. Like we as people are kind of terrible at saying what we want, right? But like Jeff Bezos and Amazon, like they have really found something that we want in Prime. And this is just kind of going to that point that people don't always realize what they want. But if you are sort of if you're using practical empathy and digging into what they're asking for, you can figure out what that solution is and build it for them.
Yeah, so I just want to talk a little bit about how we actually used this getting real philosophy about features staying on the porch when we launched, because there was a ton of customers who were like, oh, we want to do this and this and this. This is kind of some of the major features we launched after we released Geocodio. So for example, we released the ability to geocode a spreadsheet. This is a completely new market we hadn't even considered. We built an app basically for developers to integrate Geocodio into the app. Now, 50% of all our lookups go through the spreadsheet upload tool. Like data scientists, all kinds of analytics companies and stuff like that are using this tool to just upload an Excel file or whatever and geocode that instead. The other big thing that was requested was reverse geocoding. It took a long time before we decided, OK, fine, we'll do it. Now maybe 10-15% of all our lookups are reverse geocoding. Still not like a huge part of our business, but a lot of people would simply not use our product if they knew they couldn't also do reverse geocoding if they needed to. And by the way, reverse geocoding is just latitude and longitude into a street address. So if you have like a fleet tracking service and you have GPSs in cars, and you know what street these cars are parked on, for example, you can use the reverse geocoding.
And so just one point here is adding features does not necessarily result in revenue or even right away. Like how you're framing the product and how you're speaking to the customer about the value you're providing for them and sort of understanding the job they're hiring us to do, it's very important to understand that. And so you can not only functionally have this feature that does something for them, but also speak to them about why they should use it and why it's important to them. And so to this point, this has been, I think as a product person, it's really difficult for me to understand this, but distribution and marketing is just as important as your product, and a good product won't just sell itself. Like it's really important to think about SEO and your marketing and your copy and how all of those things impact people's, first of all, their awareness of your product and then their understanding of what it can do for them. And so, for example, like SEO has been a really big focus for us, and we ended up getting rid of that website with all of the neon colors and everything about a year or so in and relaunched it, mostly so we could have better SEO. And so we know that our primary piece in the market is unlimited geocoding, and so we've done a lot of work to make sure that we're the top result on Google for that. And that really didn't cost us anything.
Also want to show another example of a project that we've been a part of, I've been a part of. I built this app called Spotpress with Nick Seminara, who's somewhere in the audience.
There's Nick.
And basically we launched this, and we ended up shutting it down after like a year and a half. And one of the big problems, I think, with the service was it was potentially a good product. It was really like advanced and stuff like that, but it was too complicated. It was very complicated to maintain, build, and work with. But it was also complicated to explain to the users why they should pick this product, what was in it for them. So just keep it simple is one of the kind of takeaways from that. And if you build it, they're not necessarily going to come.
Yeah.
And then the last part of our framework is user advantages.
So one of these big advantages is that you have no overhead.
So for example, if you're a programmer, you have the ability to go ahead and build something. It doesn't cost anything to build something. You probably already have a laptop or something like that. You can just get started. The only big expenses you'll have is servers and things like that. So you can really take advantage of those kind of things. One example was we built Geocodio about a year, 2 years in. Suddenly a competitor came out with like a full-on pay-as-you-go solution. Did exactly what we do, just better. And the pricing structure was about 50% cheaper than ours. And we had customers coming asking, oh, so why are we paying like twice as much for you? Are you better? And we're like, no, we're not. So what we did was like, OK, we have to match our pricing to what they did. And overnight, we slashed all our pricing in half. That's a huge, huge risk. So if this was your full-time employment, well, like that would be a big problem for you. Since it was a side project for us, it wasn't quite as big as a risk. We can sort of take that calculated risk and like write it out.
Yeah, I mean, that was a huge risk for us to take, but we had to take it because in this market, we were fundamentally price takers. But we didn't have, employees who were, relying on this salary for their lives, right? Like it was just our side project, and if we lost revenue, it wasn't that big of a deal. And so you can just kind of see our revenue, and like so here is where it was like September of 2015 when Google added pay-as-you-go pricing that was 50% cheaper than ours. And then so in January of the following year, we finally decided we had to cut our prices. We didn't have any other options. And then you can see our revenue kind of flatlined, and then it went down, and that kind of sucked and hurt. But then it recovered, and we found other ways of getting into the market. And so this is another advantage that you have, right? So thinking, you don't have any overhead, you don't have employees, you don't have people who are really relying on this business, right? Another thing here is your competitive landscape. So this is from Des Traynor, who's the founder of Intercom. And this is from an amazing blog post he wrote on not all good products make good businesses. And he's basically saying, what are the different markets where it makes sense for a business to be in? And so, if your problem is a frequent problem that's a big problem for people, like that's a great market to be in. And why I bring this up is because what he's saying, and I agree with this, is it doesn't make sense for a business that's, a business that's scaling up, that has employees, that could, be something with hundreds of people in it, for it to be in a market with a rare and small problem, because people probably don't have a high willingness to pay for that, or they're not encountering this problem. But if you find yourself with a problem in this market, you can launch a side project there, because it doesn't make sense for a large business to enter it. So this is an advantage that you have because you don't have any overhead. And so another thing we talk about all the time is whether you should go full time, and just like sort of full disclosure, like we haven't. And so the things, but these are kind of the things that we go through when we're talking about this. So the first thing is your revenue. Like you want to have a really stable base of revenue, and you probably want to take your current salary and then add 30% on top of that. Thinking about stuff like health insurance. So if you're not in the US, you don't have to worry about that probably. Okay. I guess the TLDR of this is launch your business somewhere else, right? So take, I think a number that we always kind of went on was like 6 months of consistently generating our salary plus 30% on top of that. But then another thing is the competitive advantage of your product, right? So, in the geocoding market, like, we don't have a potential for a long-term competitive advantage because there's fundamentally only one right answer to what the latitude and longitude is of a particular address. And so from a competitive standpoint, we're basically the equivalent of all of those t-shirt stores in Times Square, right? Like, it's all the same, and maybe you have a little bit of leverage on pricing, or like your store is a little nicer or something like that, but like your core product it cannot be differentiated from everybody else, and that's a really difficult market to be in long term. And so we kind of keep viewing this as a short-term arbitrage, even though it's been going on for like 3.5 years. And then the last thing is, how much do you love this problem? Like, you started this because you were frustrated by it, but like, is this something you want to devote your life to? Is this something you can see yourself doing 5, 10, 15 years from now?
So another thing to consider is, okay, now you're up and running and everything. How do you get the word out, and how do you sort of like using your advantages there? And think about it. We are Laracon right now. There's a ton of people around you with similar interests and working similar things. You can go talk to them. You're plugged into the community. There's also a lot of like things like Reddit, subreddits, or whatever, or StackOverflow and stuff like that. We use StackOverflow and Quora a lot, where people are asking, "Oh, what's that geocoding solution that can like do a lot of lookups really, really cheaply?" And we just said, "Hey, we are biased, but check us out." Another like interesting thing we did was, when we launched Geocodio, we had a very young daughter, and what I did was, when she was like 5 months old, I took her in a little car seat up to the local startup incubator, 1776 in Washington D.C. And there was like a beta test, some kind of beta test event, and went up there and like showed off a prototype of Geocodio and asked people to like enter addresses with my daughter sitting right there sleeping, like leaving like small flyers and things like that. Really just trying to hustle a little bit to get the word out, and that's okay. Like, everybody's sort of in the same boat, but just try to get some feedback, but also try to get some buzz around your thing. Like, it's just get out there. Meetups is also a fantastic way. Like, love local meetups who love to have new speakers. All kinds of meetups, not necessarily just like PHP meetup, but also like local startup or API meetups, and there's a ton of things. So another thing is customer support. I was kind of touching that in the beginning. It's actually really, really important. And one thing that we will sort of recommend based on our experience is try to do customer support as long as you possibly can. Today, we're still the only people doing customer support for Geocodio. It's easy to like think, oh, we're starting to make a little bit of revenue. The first thing we should do is hire someone part-time to help with customer support. If you can, try to do it yourself. It's such a tremendous amount of feedback you get. You get to talk to the customers directly. You also get to deliver really, really good customer support, because if there's some kind of bug, like opening a spreadsheet, it failed, I can go into my Century or Bugsnag and check out like exactly what areas, and I give live feedback to the user. Maybe even push a little hotfix at the same time. That's a huge advantage. So try to do that as long as you possibly can.
And our last point is that anything can be an advantage if you regard it that way. So, for example, like, you don't necessarily have to have subject matter expertise in your field. So, like, neither one of us are GIS people. Like, we didn't really know that much about mapping, but we had a problem in that space, and it meant that we built a problem we built a solution for people like us, right? Like, if both of us, were geographers and knew about, we probably would have way over-featured the solution, probably would have never launched it, and instead we only understood as much as we needed to in order to build a solution. Also, having a full-time job is an advantage, right? Like, you're not relying on this for all of your revenue. So as he was talking about earlier, this is a sandbox for you to learn about how to run a business, how to create a product. If you want to either, advance at your current job, maybe into more of a business role, or move somewhere else, or like that, like, it's a huge opportunity for you to learn new skills. I know, both of us have gotten new jobs in the past 3 years, and our side project was a huge part of those interview conversations and proving that we had the skills necessary to be in our jobs.
And like, having kids is not necessarily a thing that makes it more difficult to launch a side project. Like, think about it. Suddenly you have less hours in the day. You suddenly have a more structured daily life. You have just a few hours in the evening, maybe some hours in the weekend. You really have to optimize the time you're spending there. And just use that as your like zen time and getting stuff done. But also, it can also be something of encouragement. For example, when we found out what the cost of daycare is right now in the US, in like a big city, we were like, oh, that's a good like secondary or like extra motivator to launch a side project. If you can get a little bit of extra pocket money, essentially, that can go towards daycare. And actually, as a matter of fact, we found out that daycare is often as much as college. So, yay!
Cool. Okay, so what we talked about today. Build something you need. Build it simply. Use all the advantages you have, because there are so many out there. And then we kind of also talked a little bit about like what you should think about before going full time, and some more of the practical stuff on starting a business. Do we have time for questions?
I know that you're all really hungry, probably a little bit. Put your schedule a little bit today. I think that if you have any questions, just reach out to us right after this. We'll be around. We'll also be hungry, so it's okay. And we'll see you around, right?
Yeah. All right. Thank you.